even if you have concerns about the American economy, you might not agree with this headline.
I hope not. This is the latest edition of The Independent, not from the 1920s. USA 2008, the Great Depression. The United Kingdom boldly proclaims that the U.S. is in the throes of a modern-day Great Depression. At least this one newspaper does.
And is this over the top, even by British tabloid standards? Our Fox panel back now to debate it. Peter Schiff, The Independent, this newspaper, uses certain statistics and metrics, most of which have to do with the usage of food stamps increasing in certain states. But it does appear that in about 40 of the 50 states, usage of food stamps has gone up. So they are then using that as the metric by which they are judging that we might be facing yet another Great Depression. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily use that analogy, but I think so. I mean, I didn't title my book Crash Proof for nothing. But, you know, I mean, if you remember what happened, you know, why we had a Great Depression. The Federal Reserve in the 1920s inflated the stock market bubble. It burst, and then when the recession ensued, the politicians, both Hoover and Roosevelt, didn't want the free market to sort it out. They came to the rescue, trying to save everything, and of course that created the Depression. Something similar happened this time. The Federal Reserve now blew up two bubbles, first in the stock market and then in the real estate market, much bigger than the bubble of the 1920s. Now those bubbles have burst. The market is going to bring in a recession, and now you have politicians trying to interfere, trying to make it better, and now we run the risk of them creating another depression.
But Scott Martin, we had other factors in the 30s. We had a trade war that began with the Smoot-Hawley Act that lasted through the 30s and made things even worse. We had a whole lot of factors that added up. First of all, we didn't have as solid a middle class as
much
we
more
have
limited
today.
Economy.
So it was a very different scene. Isn't this at least exaggeration by a British tabloid?
I think it definitely is, David. And I'd rather personally eat the food that the food stamps afford me in the U.S. than eat any food in the U.K. So
great point.
Take that, Independent, okay? David, exactly right. I mean, the economy, and I like Peter and I like his thoughts, but I tell you, the economy now versus 1920 or 1930 is completely different.
Yeah, it's much worse.
It's a much more variable economy, much more diverse, and it can get out of other problems. Now, we're also seeing this stuff pop up in different states where there are industries that are depressed, like manufacturing. So that makes sense that maybe more people are on food stamps, but there's also a ploy in those states, guys, for people to go out and enroll for these programs. Yeah. So naturally, the subscription is up.
Well, Rick Martin, Rick, what do you think about that perception? Because also, you look at the free market and how it works. We're going to have a guy on in the next hour who is buying up huge numbers of homes that are in foreclosure in Michigan, because he can buy them in bulk and turn them around, make a lot of money. The free market is stepping in here and doing pretty well. There aren't the food lines that we saw during the Great Depression.
I'm looking forward to David having a whole segment on the Smoot-Hawley Act.
Great ratings on that.
The food stamp statistics actually get to another legitimate problem, which is there is a growing gap between rich and poor. I mean, this is income inequality, and this is an acknowledged problem. But, you know, we've all been hyperventilating over the last few months about, you know, what might at best be a mild recession. We like to think we're modern people. We can outsmart the business cycle. We can't. We're in the downside of the business cycle right now, and we're seeing everything associated with that, which is fire sales. People are suffering some pain. We will pop out of it, and, you know, we'll have a...
And, Terry, to put things in perspective, we had unemployment at 30% during the Great Depression.
Exactly.
Our unemployment may go up, but it's nowhere near that now. We have a stock market right now that's up 366 points.
And I'm reading Emily Schle's book on the Great Depression. I mean, if you want to read that and look at today, you see, you had teenagers committing suicide because their families couldn't put food on the table. I mean, that's a far cry from people using food stamps and that increasing in 40 states, you know. And we also had huge...
By the way, they didn't have food stamps back then.
Exactly, and we also didn't have deposit insurance. And there was huge price and income deflation, which we are not seeing yet.
That helped people, Terry. Remember when...
Well, it didn't help them if they had debt.
Right, but if you go back to the Great Depression, only 2% of all the money on deposit at banks were lost. The people that didn't lose money, prices fell. Conversely now, with inflation as rampant as it is, every year Americans lose far more money than was lost during the entire Depression, and the cost of living is going up, not going down.
But if it's the most leveraged economy that we ever had, you want inflation to work your way out of it. You don't want deflation.
Well, not if
People are
you're the
making more
average
money to have
American
more
who's
assets.
trying to survive. And you remember, we're just getting started, Terry. This is the beginning. You're talking about the depths of the Depression. This current Depression is just getting started. Let's see how it is in a few years.
Scott, I know that you think opposite of what Peter does, but the inflation picture, how will that then play as these months go by into the picture?
Well, it's going to be difficult, and that's one thing that I think was mentioned in the food stamp article, is that a lot of these costs of food and gas are outpacing the rise in the food stamp generation. And so the problem is that that's obviously an obstacle that they're going to have to tackle. But Liz, it's just like a cyclical thing. I mean, I think eventually, whether this slowdown lasts 3 or 6 months, I think eventually you're going to see prices slow down a little bit on the upside, and so that'll help people out eventually. I mean, we're not going to get into a period where milk's going to suddenly be $10 and people can't even buy a gallon of it because they don't have food stamps.